Did you know one of the best natural fertilizers are worm castings, and they can be grown by you at home?
So today I'm going to give you a complete walkthrough of setting up a worm composting system from receiving them in the mail all the way till 2.5 months later once the bin's more established. We'll be using the Urban Worm Bag today, which is a flow-through system that makes it easy to harvest and maintain your worms. But these natural and inexpensive techniques that I'm going to show you will increase the diversity of microbes in your worm bins, as well as the final quality of the castings you produce. So let's get into the most important part of your worm system, which is bedding and moisture.
Okay, let's go ahead and set up the Urban Worm Bag here, and they sent me for the bedding coco coir. You can just use coco coir for your worms. It's an excellent bedding. It holds moisture really well. It's fantastic. But I'm going to show you guys a bunch of other options that you can get for free, and I really recommend that you use a variety of carbon sources because, as you guys know, microbes love carbon and they want to feed on it in all different types. So if we give them access to that, we will have more diversity in our worm bin and have better food, healthier, stronger worms as a result of this, in my opinion. So in addition to the coco coir, I have some hay here, or straws, of course, fine as well. I have leaf mold. This is leaves that we put last winter in these wire bins. I really recommend that you do that in the fall to create your own leaf mold soil, super high in microbial and fungal diversity. This is already partially broken down. This is gonna have a ton of microbes that the worms need to break down the food ahead of time before they're able to fully access it. Then I have some really fine wood chips. I wouldn't recommend really putting wood chips in your bin other than it's like a long-term carbon source that microbes and fungi will work on over time. And so don't put big chunks, don't put sticks in there. But if you can get something like this, that's this really fine wood chip, this is a hardwood chip, I would use this. And this is gonna actually break down into soil quite easily, but you don't really want a bunch of pokey sharp sticks in there. It's gonna hurt your hand as you dig out the castings. And then here I have a little bit of charcoal that I made from my brush fires. You guys know I love to make biochar, charcoal, and all that stuff. And I'm gonna add this in just a very, very small amount. Charcoal is a great home for microbes, for them to set up shop. Tiny bit of ash is probably on these as well. A little bit of mineral content in there. Now, the other couple things I'm gonna be adding are minerals. Microbes, every single life form needs minerals. So what I'm gonna do is pre-soak all of this carbon ahead of time, and I'm gonna soak it in my minerals so that all of the carbon's completely loaded up. So by doing this, this is gonna give us a better final casting. There's gonna be more microbial diversity, healthier microbial diversity, way more nutrients. All of the micronutrients, all of the macronutrients, everything is gonna be guaranteed to be in these worm castings. And that's what's so beneficial about doing this yourself. You control the ingredients that go into this. A lot of times, straw and hay is sprayed with glyphosate or other herbicides. You have to be super careful with that. Also, horse manure is another thing that's recommended a lot to be used in worm bin systems, which it is fantastic. It has the best carbon nitrogen ratio of any manure, especially for something like, it's higher in carbon for something like this. It's very good. But if you don't know the source of your horse manure, please do not use it, because horses are dewormed and given medications constantly that are going to damage soil biology. Now, some of it may remain in the castings when they go out to your gardens. Now, microbial diversity can knock out a lot of chemicals and stuff like that, but why would we put something in there that may damage that biology? So just, if you're gonna use a horse manure, an aged horse manure, just be careful about the source. So the minerals that I'll be adding are sea salt and azomite rock dust. So these are both things that I talk about in gardening and farming all the time. So I'm doing 3.75 grams of salt per gallon of water, and that ratio is just coming from Young-Sung Cho's organic farming book that I talk about all the time, Jadam. So I've got 7 grams in here. I'm gonna do about 2 gallons of water-ish. I've got about a cup of azomite. Azomite's just a volcanic ash mineral deposit. So these are all very clean minerals. Get it nice and dissolved in there. And whatever's excess of this, I can just dilute in a water can and water into my garden. So we'll do the coco coir first. You'll need about 1 gallon of water for one of these cocoa blocks. And this is just made from coconut husk. And coco coir is a great replacement for peat moss. Peat moss is another material that you can use for their bedding. So I've got another one that I'm gonna save for a couple months later when I add in more bedding. Now I'm gonna add in all of our leaves. Now these wood chips, I'm not gonna go too heavy on that, just a little bit. Now, if this is too complicated for you, just do the coco coir and don't worry about it. Your worms will do fantastic. You can always add in little handfuls of this carbon as you go. Once the cocoa sits in the water for a little while, it'll be easier to break apart. So just, give it 10 minutes to soak. Oh, and then one more thing I forgot to mention that I'm going to be adding is just some extra inoculant. Now that leaf mold soil, that's one of the best inoculants I think for a worm bin, because that's gonna be very similar to what the worms want to be living in. I'm gonna add in a tiny, tiny handful, a tablespoon at tops of IMO3 that I've made, Indigenous Microorganisms 3. This is a very advanced input in Korean natural farming, more fungal dominated type of compost basically. So it's very powerful. So I'm just gonna add in a very small amount here, just to add in some more of those beneficial microbes. And that is one of the best benefits of worm castings, is the diverse microbiology, because it's going through the gut system of the worm, picking up all this amazing stuff. So while this is soaking, let's go ahead and set up our urban worm bag. Super sturdy bag, and it's pretty cool. I talked to the owner, Steve. He's been doing this business for a long time, improving this bag over time. I saw the original version back with my friend Kevin Epic Gardening in San Diego many years ago. Okay, so the first thing that we're just gonna do, I'm just gonna separate everything out and organize it. We've really got 3 pieces here. We've got a long piece with a male end, long piece with a female end, and then a short piece with a female end. So the first thing that we'll build out is the base. All you need is the corner piece, one of the long male ends, and one of these shorter female ends. Okay, I've got 4 of those built out. Push them together pretty hard and they're gonna click into place. The next section is gonna use the 2 long pieces, one long female, one long male. Put those together. Then we're gonna attach the vertical pieces, push down till it pops in. The top is the same as the bottom. Get your pipes put together. And just do each side. Okay, so now's a good time to explain how this works and what's so great about a flow-through system. Just like in my tote system, the worms want to keep going up to the new bedding. This works the exact same way. We're gonna fill our bedding up right after this to about 1/3, and this will be the area that they live for the first about 4 months, and we will slowly add in more carbon and food on the top here, and they'll keep moving up as they digest and eat all the food down here. And after about 4 to 6 months, what we're gonna have left with at this bottom area with the drawstring is finished castings. So when we collect, we'll be taking this off. You'll just open this up. The finished castings will be easy just to pull out. You'll close this back up, put this back on, and then you'll wait another 3-4 months or so, and then harvest again. So to figure out that optimal time of when you're gonna harvest your castings, that's just gonna depend on the type of bedding that you're using, the moisture, the temperature, all those different things that are gonna be relative to wherever that you're living, where you're raising them, is gonna adjust those times slightly. Right now, I'm holding a lot of moisture in here. So now I'm just gonna let this sit here and drip for like an hour so that all this excess moisture can come out of here. I can even compress it. One of the worst things that you can do in your worm bed, and one of the most common mistakes, that's the same mistake with gardening, is over watering too much moisture. That's gonna cause gnats, it's gonna cause other bugs to wanna come in there. Now if you go too dry, ants might try to come in there to build a home. So you're playing a balance between those 2 things. What I'm trying to end up with is just like a wrung out sponge amount of moisture. So if I'm left with this, there's still a little bit too much moisture in this. I'd like to get a little bit more out. So now, after this dried for probably about 2 hours, here's where my bedding's at now. Do the squeeze test. Ugh, I had to squeeze it really hard just to get a few drops out. That's what I'm looking for. So I'm gonna put a small piece of cardboard here just at the bottom, just to prevent any of this initial bedding or worms from falling out the bottom. After 4 months, I expect that to be completely dissolved. So I'm setting mine up right here where I can just have it be underneath this table. Now this is gonna get very heavy and you don't wanna be sliding this back and forth, but this is sort of the best location that I have right now in my garage. Make sure that your bottom piece is on there now, that it's all cinched up nice and tight, the Velcro is attached. And because I already pre-drained it, I'm not too worried about this filling up with liquid. But if you're worried about that, you may not want to attach this until all the liquid is drained out. Just put a little tray under there. But there's so much moisture in here that there's not going to be an issue with really needing to add much at all, if at all. Typically with my previous worm systems, I only ever needed to add water in the summer, in the very heat of summer. And even then, like, it barely needed anything because you're usually adding in wet foods, things like that, and that's adding in more moisture. And just the microbes, the worms themselves are just creating this very humid environment. And then you're also going to be putting a top on the top of the bedding once you add the worms. In my previous systems, I just used cardboard. Urban Worm Company gave me one of these, which my cats and chickens, of course, destroyed. This is just a hemp mat that can go on top that will block out light, hold in the moisture, and that's the point of having one of these. So ideally, you've set this up before the worms arrive, and it's been sitting, you've allowed it to sit for 24 hours, any excess moisture has dripped out, and it'll be more ready. The bacteria has started to do some work breaking down some of this material. And we're gonna also be putting in a few bit of fresh food in here for our worms as their first fresh food. Now be very careful in the beginning, just add a very small amount. You wanna get used to how much they can eat. And remember that you're starting with 1 or 2 pounds of worms. So eventually this system will get up to 4, 5, maybe 6 pounds of worms total once this thing's all the way maxed out. And at that point they can eat 1 pound or 2 of food a day, depending on what you're feeding them. But in the beginning, feed slowly, observe, really work on those observation skills. You know, anytime you're doing a new thing in farming or gardening, that's when you need the most observation, because that's where all the learning happens, is in the beginning stages when you're making mistakes. And the biggest mistake to avoid is too much moisture. So I get my worms from Memes Worms. They're not too far from me, a couple hours away, down in Georgia. And the owner there, Samantha, is really fantastic. So when you get your worms in the mail, they'll come in a box, something like this. You want to immediately either get them into your bin or maybe mist them with some water if they're not too wet. Here's a bunch of cardboard. Here's some more carbon that I can throw in. What cardboard is safe? Any cardboard where there's not the visible glue. Cardboard is actually held together with either a starch or cellulose. The layers that hold it between is not actually a chemical glue in most cases. I don't know about all cases, but most cases. Be sure to never use a glossy cardboard. I never use colored cardboard. I try, even with black ink, I try to avoid it, but black ink's not that bad. It's not a big deal. Leftover computer paper and things like that can also be used. Shredded paper could be used. I don't like to use all that stuff because it's bleached and things like that. Whenever I can, if I have the natural carbon in the form of straw, hay, those really, really fine wood chips, or sawdust, leaves, of course, things like that are my favorite carbons. The peat moss and cocoa coir, of course, are amazing, but they cost money. So I'll put a list that I've put together down in the description of what worms can and cannot eat. But in general, no dairy, no meat, just fruit and veggie scraps, no garlic or onion, lemon, or things that are going to be antimicrobial or maybe more caustic or acidic, super acidic. So then with the remaining food waste that your family creates, bones, meat, dairy, leftover dessert, sugar, gross stuff, that can be put in a Bokashi compost bin. And that's how me and my wife for the last 7 years have put no food waste into the trash at all. It's all been recycled and put back onto our land or put back into our animals to eat. If you want to learn about Bokashi composting, which is an anaerobic form of composting in a bucket, so it's perfect for somebody in an apartment or somebody who doesn't have a lot of space, or people that it's difficult for you to build up a lot of the green to add to your compost making. This is a way to store greens or nitrogen really high nitrogen for as long as you want until you're ready to build your compost pile. And that's why I recommend doing this. So check out my video about Bokashi if you want to learn more about that. If you have worms and Bokashi going at all times, you know, a small family, you're going to be able to produce a large amount of the nutrients that you need to grow vegetables or trees for a small homestead setup. My Bokashi, my worms, and then my thermophilic compost, that's the trifecta that allows me and allowed me on my market garden to basically create all my own nutrients, in addition to some Korean natural farming, and then like the minerals that I buy in, which is azomite and sea salt, but those are so inexpensive. So I hope that you guys appreciate these techniques, because to me, they're some of the best ones that you can be using that is inexpensive, but massively beneficial for your soil biology and your plants. Okay guys, so here's the red wrigglers. So I ordered 1 pound of worms, which I think is plenty for this setup. And all you gotta do is just dump them in. Then I'm just gonna spread everything out evenly, and now they're gonna do the rest of the work to go dig down into the bedding. I also like, before your bin is really established, to have a little bit of dry carbon at the top, just in case. So if they need to get out of too much moisture or something like that, they have a little bit of a dry zone at the top. I just added in some of this peat moss here from the worms, so that's what that's gonna be for them. But you know, sprinkle a little straw, a little bit of leaves, something like that. And then your mat on top. And that's it. Now I'm just gonna zip her up. And then I'll check on it over the next couple days to see how they're doing, how they're getting established. And then I'm gonna watch how much they've eaten of their food. It's gonna take them about a week to get established though. So I probably won't add any more food for about a week unless I really see that they've eaten it. Once the bin is very established and they're eating a lot, you can add food to this every couple days. But just make sure that they have eaten a lot of it before you add the next food in. There's going to be some pests or predators or other prey insects that are going to enter this at some point, and just don't be alarmed by that. This is a living system. It's not only going to be earthworms in here. That's mostly what it's going to be, especially once they really overtake this bin and make it their own, because they're going to set up everything, the pH, the bacteria, everything's going to be set up mostly for them. But you'll get things like these mites that come in. They love eating on squash, I've noticed. Ants if it gets too dry. Maybe some flies or gnats. Maybe some soldier fly. None of those are really problematic. If you did have a bunch of fly larvae or something lay eggs in there, I would physically remove it all. Remove all of the food waste. Add in some dry carbon to help soak up extra moisture. And then start again with some food waste after a couple days. Because worms can really, after all this carbon that we gave them, all those different sources of carbon, they can live on that for quite a while without any fresh food. And I've done that from experience. Just I tell you that so that you know that if you do run into an emergency or an outbreak of, you know, too many insects or something, then you can kind of restart it like that. But hopefully you're going to take my advice to heart and do not over moisten the bedding. If you soak it like I showed you and let it drain, you shouldn't really run into an over wet situation. So from here on out, I'm basically not going to add water to this. Basically all the water is going to come from the food sources that I put in here. But if it was to somehow get bone dry after a few months, I would take a watering can and lightly water from the top and let it drain down through. If any came down from the bottom, I add it to the top again. And just slowly add moisture in that way. So it's now been 2.5 months since I started this worm bin, and I wanted to give you a few more tips at the end here about feeding and just some things that you might want to pay attention to in those first few months. So when feeding in the beginning, I recommend just putting in 1 or 2 banana peels, you know, a couple slices of potato or a couple slices of squash, and that's it for the first week. And just kind of watch what happens every day, how the worms feed on it, lift up those pieces of food, look underneath, see what the worms are doing. As time progresses and the worms grow out their population more, and you can start to feed them a little bit more. Now, after 2.5 months, I am noticing it's a little bit dry in there. I actually do want to add some moisture to this. So I will just add in a very slight amount. So you can see how it's looking here. There's a little bit of mold on that banana peel, no big deal at all. Things are breaking down. You're gonna also wanna smell. I don't smell any bad smells. It smells like a worm bin.
and that has a very specific smell. It kind of smells like leaf mold soil or forest floor. So what temperature should the soil be for your worms? Well, around 80 degrees is really ideal for them. You do not want to go lower than 40. You're gonna start having some problems. In this garage, I don't really envision going below 40. If I do, well, one thing I will use is a seedling heating mat. I could just plug that in and throw this inside of there. Those can get wet, dirty, doesn't matter, and they just produce a small amount of ambient heat. That would really help them on a very cold night. If you guys would like to buy